University. And, you know, there's something about the kids that come out of Cleveland State that are a lot like Kevin Mackey's system and the guys like Pat that made it through. We work hard. We dive for the loose balls. We may not be superstars, but we'll be there in the end for you. And I can't think of a better speaker for you all to hear from today other than Pat Vuyancih. So Pat.
First thing I'm going to do is set my timer, because as my friends like to say, I can be quite loquacious. So anyway, I am so honored to be here, and I want to thank the members of the National Football League Luncheon Committee, RJ Van Einem, I'm sorry, RJ Allman. I'm going to have to put my glasses up, I'm getting a little old. And Len Krishko, who was supposed to be the speaker here today, who asked me to step in. It's amazing to me that I'm standing here. My story is not unique, but it's certainly one that really relied on a lot of people that helped me along the way. I want to ask a question to start out. I'm a retired teacher. I was a history teacher, and I was an administrator. How many of you watched that Connecticut Duke game last night and saw the end of that game? Okay. 10 seconds left. If you didn't watch, 10 seconds left. Duke was winning by 19 in the second half. Connecticut comes all the way back. They're down 2, and there's 10 seconds to play. Coach Hurley from Connecticut puts on a full court press defense where they're on the ball. They got their best athletes up there. Duke inbounds the ball. They get it to their point guard, their best ball handler, and he has a split second to make a decision as 2 really athletic guys are running at him with their hands up. What does he do? He tries to throw a pass to a teammate he sees breaking up the floor. It gets deflected. It gets passed to the 2-time national champion shooter, their best player of Connecticut. He instead turns and throws it to a freshman who hits the game-winning shot, and they win the game now to put them in the Final Four. And the reason I'm describing that 10 seconds is because that's how Cleveland State played basketball under Kevin Mackey for 40 minutes. That type of, Coach Mackey called it a canvas of chaos. He wanted to create a canvas of chaos. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that. Before I do, I want to give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in Euclid, Ohio. My father was a mailman, raising 6 kids, Catholic family. We didn't have much, but we had everything we needed. And we had a lot of love. My parents were both ethnic. My mom was the daughter of ethnic Hungarian immigrants. We ate a lot of chicken pepperkosh and good stuff. You can't beat that ethnic food, let me tell you. I still, my son now makes a phenomenal chicken pepperkosh with my grandmother's recipe straight from Hungary. My dad was the son of Irish and Croatian immigrants who met in the 1930s, and in those days, neither family agreed that they should marry each other because of their ethnic differences. Can you imagine that today? My father was my greatest influence. Got up every day, 5:30. He was a retired. He dropped out of high school, Conwood High School, because all his buddies were joining the Navy. He got pneumonia when he was in 11th grade. And missed most of the school year. His buddies went beyond him. Then they all joined the Navy, went in the Navy. He served on a destroyer during the Korean conflict. And then he came back and was a mailman for 42 years. And every day I watched him get up at 5:30 in the morning and go to work. And he was the guy that when the other mailmen ran off to the bars at noon and forgot to deliver the rest of their route, he would pick up their routes and finish their routes for them. He was that guy. And then he worked at Cleveland Stadium for many years in the pass gate office where people like Muhammad Ali and Richard Nixon would have to pass him to go upstairs when they visited the Cleveland Indians in those days. He was just a great, great human being. The coaches that I played for legendary coaches. Ted Kwasniak was my grade school coach at St. William. Ted is in the Hall of Fame for CYO in Greater Cleveland. He will be in the Ohio High School Hall of Fame. He won multiple state championships at St. Joseph High School. And then I also played for Mike Moran, who was my freshman coach at St. Joseph High School in 1978-79. These are legendary coaches up in the Greater Cleveland area. And I remember vividly when St. Joe upset Canton McKinley when they were ranked #1 in 1983. They had Gary Grant on that team. An interesting fact is that Gary Grant grew up on the near west side of Cleveland and played with Stan Kimbrough, who went on to be the starting point guard at Xavier in the mid-1980s. Those guys were on such a phenomenal team, and then they played each other in that game. That was when McKinley was ranked #1 in the country. It was a not very memorable game. There's actually a plaque dedicated to that game in Skinny's Bar and Grill on East 222nd Street in Euclid. You can see it if you ever visit Skinny's. It's right across from Euclid High School. It's a great little tavern. And then from the basketball influence, the greatest influence that I've ever been around is Clark Kellogg. I was a freshman at St. Joseph High School when Clark was a senior. That was the 1978-79 school year. And Clark is the most sincere, kind, Christian, unselfish man I've ever met in my life. Every day, I would run down to the snack bar in the basement near the cafeteria at St. Joseph High School and buy a frozen Kit Kat just because I knew Clark was doing the same thing. Just so I could stand next to him for a few minutes. And I don't know if all of you are familiar with Clark Kellogg, but he set the school or the state record of 51 points in the state championship game. In that season, they lost to Columbus East. Most people don't know that he had 43 points in the semifinal game the day before against Cincinnati LaSalle. That's a pretty good average, I think, 47 points per game over a 2-day period. That was before the three-point line. But the thing that I remember about Clark Kellogg and the thing that I loved most about him is he took time to speak to every young man who ever approached him. He made every young man who came before him feel special. To this day, if you call him on his cell phone, you'll get if you get his answering, get the answer, his voice comes up, and he'll start with a new quote from the Bible every day. He was the valedictorian of his senior class after having grown up in East Cleveland. And he just was the greatest athlete I ever saw. He would win every competition, whether it was preseason conditioning, running around the fields, or the weightlifting. But the thing I remember most is I was a skinny little 5'7" freshman, and there was a guy named Ramon Basty who was on that team. And in the preseason, Ramon was a little slow getting back into the gym. And Clark said, "Pat, come on, you're on my team." And I was on a cloud nine. I mean, it was unbelievable. Clark Kellogg was the LeBron James of the late 1970s. He was the #1 rated player in the country. And I actually scored a few baskets. But the thing I remember more than anything is the count, they called him, Ramon Count Basie. Came back into the gym just before he started playing. He said, "Clark, what's up? What's up?" He says, "You were late, I got past." And for a guy like that to do something like that for me, he hadn't even seen me play. I was just kind of hanging around, you know. But he has been like that with every person he's ever come across. And in my mind, still the greatest player that I've ever seen in the state of Ohio. So, Kevin Mackey and the 1986 Cleveland State Vikings, which I'm so grateful to have been a part of, captured the imagination of the NCAA world, basketball world in 1986. How did he do it? How did he do it? And Coach just died in November. I actually spoke to him the day that he died. It's been 40 years. It was March of 1986 when we upset Indiana in the first round and then eventually lost to Navy and David Robinson. And I spoke to him a lot in this last year. The only thing he wanted to know anymore, every time we talked is, hey, how's Eddie doing? How's Sean doing? How's Eric doing? We talked to this guy, we talked to that guy. You know, he was just so proud of all of us that had moved on and become professionals and done well in our careers. And he wanted to just keep track of us. But how did he do it? Well, I'll give you a few stories. So that year we had 2 losses. Our first loss was at Southwest Missouri State. And if you remember, Darius Garland, who just left the Cavs, his father, Winston Garland, was the best player at Southwest Missouri State and played in the NBA himself for about 8 years. We lost at Southwest Missouri State. And then we went to Michigan, and we were 13-1, and Michigan was 14-0. And on that team, they had Roy Tarpley, and they had Gary Grant, and Antoine Jobert, and Butch Wade, and Richard Relford. You remember these names because they were the most iconic Michigan team that I think I'd ever seen up to that point. And everybody agrees that Roy Tarpley was the best player in the country, hands down. So we go to Michigan, and we're going to put our full court pressure on, but the day before we're in practice, and it's probably 45 minutes to an hour before practice, and Coach Mackey blows his whistle. He goes, fellas, he had this thick Boston brogue, little Irish guy. Fellas, come here. And then he says, he starts looking around the Chrysler Arena like this. He goes, fellas, they're watching us. They're watching us. We're going to cut practice short. They're trying to figure out how we do this press. So we're going to cut it short. I'm looking around. I'm like, I don't see anybody. You know? I mean, is he making this thing up? You know? And he might have been. Coach Mackey, right? He tried to create an edge. He didn't have to work real hard at it because the guys he recruited were all guys that were under-recruited. I was cut at St. Joe's in 10th grade. I got cut at Euclid High School after I transferred in 11th grade. I only played 1 year of high school basketball. Somehow this guy found me playing in the Cleveland Rec Leagues while I was a student at Lakeland Community College. He called me on a summer night and 11 o'clock at night at my parents' house. I don't know how he got my phone number. He says, hey, Pat, some of my guys are telling you could help us. How's your grades? Not good, Coach. You think he could get in? I'm not sure, Coach. I really wasn't taking my studies very seriously at that time. I was coaching the freshman team at Euclid High School. My legendary high school coach asked me to help out, but I wasn't really taking my studies very seriously. But he tried. He stayed with it. He tried getting me in, but he couldn't. My grades were too low, and I just wasn't. I'd kind of given up the dream of playing college basketball, but he never gave up on me. And that was the story for all the other guys that I played with on that team. Guys from Boston and New York, Mouse McFadden, from Madison Square Boys Club, who never graduated from high school. He got a GED. He had issues at home, and was never able to play high school basketball. Mackey said he spotted Mouse playing in an AAU tournament, and he said, Pat, it was incredible. He was scoring like 40 points, and then I saw him moonwalk. As he scored a basket, he moonwalked backward, and I had to get him. And at that time, there were 4 or 5 other great All-American guards coming out of New York City at that time. And he said, I figured the only guy I could get would be Mouse. Nobody else probably would have gone after a guy like that, And it was true of every other guy on that team. We were all under-recruited. We were all guys that had a chip on our shoulder. And that's what he looked for. So he recruited a bunch of guys that nobody else wanted. And or seemed to think could be successful at that level. And then he used this system, we're going back to the Michigan practice. It was so hard for teams to figure out because we used so many guys. We just kept bringing in waves of athletes, and we would just, as he said, we're gonna use multiple bodies. We're gonna keep fresh legs, and we're gonna wear them down over 40 minutes. But it took sacrifice. Clinton Smith, who was everybody knew was our best player, had transferred to us after playing at Ohio State and then at a junior college out in Arizona. Clinton Smith was drafted by the Golden State Warriors and by far our best athlete. And Clinton had to buy in to this system that only allowed him to play 24 to 26 minutes a game. I mean, could you imagine the best players on these teams today agreeing to only play 26 out of the 40 minutes in a game today with all the things that are on the line, the NIL money? They're going to get more money the better they play these days. That's the way it works in the new college game. It probably wouldn't happen, probably won't ever happen again. But so he found guys like Clinton Smith, who was purely one of the greatest players I ever played against. And he said, you can beat Michigan, play our game, okay? At halftime of that game, we're down 2. We made a furious run going into the half. And at the Chrysler Arena, both teams run into the same tunnel, and then the home locker room goes this way, and the visitors' locker room goes this way. And a couple of our guys were running in next to Roy Tarpley saying, hey, we got more of that coming for you in the second half, man. And Tarpley, I remember, I was running right there. He looks down at our little point guard, I'm not going to say whose name is, but he looks down at him. Okay. We came out in the second half, and they just took us to the woodshed. They beat us by 20. I think it was 115 to 85. They were dunking on us every kind of which way. They completely humiliated us. And after the game, we go in the locker room, and myself and current Cuyahoga County Councilman Marty Sweeney are in the locker room first. The guys come in. Mackey picks up a garbage can and he throws it, and Marty's in the, it hits Marty, and this thing explodes all over the place. He goes, I'm not going to use the language he used, but you can imagine it was quite colorful. You woke him up with your mouth. You should have kept your mouth shut, And everybody's like, oh, And for the rest of that season, until we played at DePaul, he would throw that in our face. He used it as a platform to humble us and to teach us that even though we were climbing the ranks, we still weren't there. So fast forward to DePaul, they have an All-American guard named Rod Strickland, 2 other guys, Dallas Comegys and Marty Embry. And it's at DePaul, it's in January, and it's a huge game for us because we had lost also at Ohio State in the interim between that and a close game. And the message before the game from Coach Mackey was, fellas, if you get a lead, keep your mouth shut. Let the sleeping lions sleep. Don't wake them up. That was it. That was the whole pregame speech. He had us prepared to play our style, which was 5 guys would play the first 4 minutes, 5 guys would come off the bench and play the next 4 minutes, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the game, if you were playing well and you were hitting your free throws, you were staying in. And we used just tremendous pressure, kept the intensity level up, and wore teams down. And we beat DePaul at DePaul 90-75. And that was the game where Mouse McFadden really had his coming out party. I mean, Rod Strickland, of course, if you're watching the NCAA tournament, I think he's coaching at is it Long Island University now? He was in the tournament this year, but Rod went on to have a 12, 13-year career in the NBA. He was a great player. Mouse was by far the best player on the floor of that game. And unfortunately, it wasn't broadcast back here in Northeast Ohio because a satellite was knocked out from this winter storm or something. The satellite feedback to Cleveland. Nobody in Cleveland got to see that game. But trust me when I say this, Mouse McFadden was just phenomenal that night. So we go on and we end up winning our conference regular season, and then we have to play in the conference tournament. And we beat Kevin Duckworth, who went on to play for the Phoenix Suns for many years, and Eastern Illinois. And we win our conference championship, and we still don't know if we're going to have a bid. There was no automatic bid for our conference in those days. So we're gathered at the Viking Lounge, and the announcement comes on, Cleveland State, and it was late in the whole selection process. Cleveland State will play Indiana, and the whole room just erupts, just bedlam. And in fact, all I remember was just, we saw our name, now we're like looking around like, who are we playing again? Who are we really had to, we're playing Bobby Knight. We're playing Indiana? Olympic gold medal, two-time national champion Bobby Knight, the general. It was absolutely unimaginable that we would get that pick. And we were the 14th seed, they were the 3 seed. So going into that game, the day before in practice, so I like to joke with people. David said I was kind of the glue of that team, and I kind of was. I was the 11th man in a 10-man rotation on that team. And, but I'm very proud of that because I started that year as a walk-on, and I moved up ahead of 3 scholarship players and was traveling the last third of the season. And Mackey threw me, and one day he called me up to his office, and he said, Pat, I'm giving you a chance today in practice. Because most days I would just rebound for Mouse or rebound for Clinton and pass the ball and stand there and watch. That was literally how I had to spend most of that junior year. But he said, I'm going to give you a chance. He said, you ready? I go, I'm ready, coach. He put me in there, and I had a good practice. Did some nice things. And my teammates were asking me stuff like, did you ever get offered a scholarship? I said, no, I never got recruited, no. And but I made that travel squad, and I got to be at all those games down that stretch. And the day before we're going to play Indiana, we're in the Carrier Dome in Syracuse. And there's Doug Collins. He's going to be calling our game. He's one of the color commentators. And Ray Salters, who was our backup 3, got the flu and could not practice. So I was put in, as I said, the 11th man. Now I'm the 10th man. But I knew I wasn't going to play. I still knew I wasn't going to get in that game. But we're in practice, and I get the ball on the wing, and I look out to the perimeter to pass it back out. Somebody's denying the pass. I look into the post. Nobody's open. I put the ball on the floor, and I drive to score, and Eric Mudd slides in, and I swear to this day it was a block. But the assistant coach called it a charge, and Mackey went ballistic. He goes, Pat, I didn't come here to Syracuse to watch you put the ball on the floor. You couldn't dribble past your own grandmother. Now, I'm here to correct the record. I definitely could take my grandmother to the home. I promise you that. She was pretty quick, but I think I could have gotten by her. God rest Mary Neal. God rest her soul. Beautiful Irish soul she had. So we play Indiana the next day, and all the media is asking Bobby Knight the same question. You don't really believe these guys from Cleveland State can beat you guys, do you? You don't really think. And Bobby Knight waylaid. There was a reporter from Channel 3 News in Cleveland named Waylon Booth, some of you might remember. And Bobby Knight lit him up in the press conference the day before. I knew you people from Cleveland don't know anything about basketball. These kids can play. We'll be lucky to beat them. And he used, again, some colorful language that I will not repeat. So we go into this game, and we were ready. I mean, I just remember the practice the day before, the walk through that morning. Everything was crisp. Everything was moving. Guys were ready, focused. We come out to warm up, and we're going. You get 30 minutes to warm up. They put the clock down 30. You got 30 minutes, and then the game starts. We're warming up, and we're looking down at the other end. Is Indiana coming to play us today? They literally did not come out of the locker room for the first 15 minutes of warm-up. And we're like, are they showing up, you know? And they finally come out, and we could see they were going through the motions. Now, this was the season on the brink that was being written. The story, there was a book written about Bobby Knight. A reporter from the New York Times followed Bobby Knight the entire year and wrote a book called Season on the Brink. And he was recording everything that went on in their practices and so forth. We didn't know it, but there were some internal problems with that team. And it looked like these guys weren't ready to play. Well, we took full advantage. Start of the game, first 3 minutes, they couldn't get the ball in bounds. And we had guys like Clinton Ramsey just picking off and scoring, Mouse scoring, Clinton Smith scoring. And we got a big lead on them. We ended up holding the lead at the end of the game. And unbelievable. Little Cleveland State defeats the General, Bobby Knight. And the announcer for that game, a guy named Ralph Bonner, toward the end, you can listen, he called us Cleveland State, the Cinderella. It was the first time I think I had ever heard that term used. He said, Cleveland State is Cinderella. And from that point forward, we became known as the first Cinderella team. We ended up beating St. Joe's of Philly. They had an NBA player named Maurice Martin. They had the leading shot blocker in the country on their team. Another guy that was just Rodney Blake. He was 6'10" and could jump and block shots. They were a phenomenal team. And we were fortunate to beat them in the second round. And then it's on to play Navy and David Robinson. So now you have, setting this scene, you've got this group of, teams, and Mackey's playing it up with the media. He's telling the media, my guys are so hungry, they'll dive on the sidewalks for times. He's playing up this hungry inner city guy. And some of the guys went to great private Catholic schools. They grew up with great parents, and they were kind of offended that he was taking that direction with it. But he was selling the whole thing. And David Robinson, of course, is the media darling. He had the game before that was a legendary game where he had 40-some points against Syracuse, and it was played at Syracuse. Now imagine that, Syracuse playing a home game in the NCAA tournament. That was the last year the NCAA allowed that. And we sat in the end zone because we were playing St. Joseph's next, and we watched him contest or block every shot that the Syracuse guys took. They were throwing him alley-oop dunks. I mean, it was David Robinson's coming out party. So now you've got this guy, he's a Navy midshipman, and you got this Cleveland State group of ragamuffins coming on here. And they actually moved our game ahead of Duke. Can you believe that? Duke was supposed to be the primetime game that Friday night. We were supposed to play the early game. They switched it and had us play the primetime game at 7:30 that Friday night. That's how they perceive the importance of this particular matchup. And does anybody remember watching that game out there? Yep. Anybody remember? There were a few controversial calls at the end of the game. My teammate Paul Stewart grabbed a rebound with 4 seconds left. He landed, he pivoted in the lane, and the outside official comes running in with his thumbs up because Vernon Butler, their power forward, kind of tied him up for a loose ball. It really wasn't a tie-up. That whistle was blown quick, and this is the official that could see which way the arrow was pointing. Navy gets the ball, and they ran a play for Robinson. He caught it. He leaned in. He kind of charged over Paul. And believe it or not, those were the last 2 plays that Paul Stewart ever played in. He died and had a heart attack 2 months later at Woodland Gym when we were playing open gym. So, when I look at those plays still back today, I think, here's a young man, 19 years old, at the pinnacle of his life, and life just changed that quickly. But that was it. 2 weeks in March of 1986, and it's over. It's over. As fast as it came, boom, it's done. But Mackey became a national sensation in the basketball world. At the end of that game, as I said, there were a few controversial calls. We're sitting in the locker room, and it was a really dumpy locker room front. This was at the Brennan Byrne Arena where the New Jersey Nets played. And Mackey's sitting on the trainer's table in the middle of the locker room, his little Irish legs hanging over, just going like tailgating sort of thing, you know. And he's just sitting there and he's fuming, and guys are draped over their over toilets, crying their eyes out. The emotion is being shed and so forth. A media guy from the NCAA comes in and he wants to get Mackey and a couple of guys out for the media interviews, and Mackey goes, "Shut that up! Don't let anybody else in," you know. So he sits there for a few more minutes, lets the emotions pass. And I'm expecting he's going to say to the seniors, "Guys, you set the standard. You built the program here. Thanks for your commitment. And for you guys coming back, we're going to work extra." This is all the stuff I'm expecting him to say. He says none of that. All he does is he looks at us, he said, "Fellas, they weren't going to let us beat the United States Navy." And that was it. That was it. He said, "Make sure you're on the bus in the morning. Don't get arrested. We'll fly back to Cleveland tomorrow morning." And that was it. As soon as it came, it went. It was over. And that's the story of the Sweet 16 team, 1986 Cleveland State Vikings, the first Cinderella. So I guess now, did I go too long? How far did I go?
You're good.
Okay. I guess it's time to open up for questions. I have some other experiences I could answer questions about. I've coached against Canton McKinley a number of times. I can tell you about that. If you have any questions about that, some great teams. Played with Phil Hubbard, and also coached a lot of high school. And I have a great Bobby Huggins story if anybody wants to hear it. I know Hugs will be here in a couple of weeks. So if you have any questions for me about that team or about any of those other things. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Chuck Larswell.
Hi, Chuck.
Wasn't that the team that the real tall guy was on, and the NCAA came in and gave you guys penalties? What was behind
You're
that?
talking about Minute Bowl.
Yeah.
You're asking about Minute Bowl. What you want to ask the question so everybody can help? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Minute Bowl. The NCAA came in after that year. What happened on that?
Okay, so Minute came from the Sudan, and he was so the NCAA gives you 48 hours to host a student athlete who's making a visit on campus, 48 hours. So Minute came and visited us in June of 1985, but he never left. Mackey kept him in Cleveland, and I don't know how you hide a guy who's 7'7" from Sudan in a big city like the city of Cleveland, but Mackey tried really hard. And Minute would have been on that team. He would have been on that team. And if you don't know who Minute Bowl is, he went on to play in the NBA. He was 7'7" tall, 7'7" tall. And he was the nicest guy. He would give you the shirt off his back. When he retired from the NBA, he literally donated all the money he had made in his career to help stop the war, the civil war in Sudan. He gave it all away. He was that generous of a man and just the nicest guy I ever met. But they couldn't get him to pass the English entrance exam at Cleveland State because of the language barrier. But Mackey kept him on campus, and they took him over to Case Western Reserve. They tried to get him tutoring. But because you're not allowed to have somebody on campus or around campus for more than 48 hours, Mackey was basically violating the recruiting rules in that time, which I think still is the case. You're still calling host somebody for 48 hours. Now, we didn't know Mackey was being investigated actually during the Sweet 16 year and then the year after, which was my senior year. But they were investigating him, and I talked to the coach about this, and he really had some very strong opinions about why. He believed that the NCAA did not want to see him continue to knock off the Blue Bloods in the NCAA tournament. You know, a bunch of inner city guys knocking off Bobby Knight every year. They didn't really want that. He said that some of the guys they sent were pretty disrespectful to him about his program, and so. I mean, literally, it wasn't a big deal because Minute never played for us. He went on to play at University of Bridgeport, a Division II school in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Great question. Do you have any follow-ups on that?
What's that?
Do you have a follow-up question to it at all? Did I answer you okay?
A lot of my friends, I remember we all said the same thing. NCAA just didn't want to see Cleveland State make it.
Yeah, there's a great Jerry Tarkanian, the former UNLV coach, grew up in Euclid, by the way, on East 200th Street. I live on East 201st Street now by the lake. He grew up in a second floor building above a store that his parents owned on East 200th Street in Euclid. He lived there till he was 10 years old. He told me that story. When I told him I grew up in Euclid, he big smile. Oh, I grew up there. My parents had a store, then we moved out west. Tarkanian had a famous saying, when Kentucky got caught handing a whole shoebox full of cash to one of their players, Jerry Tarkanian was quoted as saying, the NCAA is so mad at Kentucky that they're going to give Cleveland State another 2 years of probation. And it was quoted all over the country. He was very close with Coach Mackey. He and Jimmy Valvano were regular visitors to Coach Mackey's office, and I got to meet both of them, and they were wonderful guys to sit down and talk to. Great question.
I'd like to hear the Bobby Huggins story.
The Bobby Huggins story. Okay. So I am the head coach at Mount Healthy High School in Cincinnati. And it was Martin Luther King Day of 1993. And I decided instead of having my guys practice, I was going to take them down to a University of Cincinnati practice that year. And I knew Huggs because I had played against him at Akron. And he had recruited a couple of guys that I had coached, one at Hamilton High School and one at Cincinnati Woodward. They were both All-Americans. And we got to hang out a lot in the summertime at some of these AAU tournaments and stuff. We had some fun together. Good guy, great guy to hang out with. So, yeah, we'll keep it at that. My wife is here, so but we were just hanging out with other coaches, really mainly. And I bring my players to this practice, and they're having Danny Fortson's making his official visit, who was the best player in the country recruited at that time. He's making his official visit. He's sitting at the half-court line on the scorer's table, and Huggs invites me down to sit next to him on the stanchion under the basket. He was just sitting there coaching, and we're just talking, and they start practice, and he must have been annoyed about something because he started in on one of his assistant coaches, Steve Muller. He stops practice. Steve, are you coaching the defense? And Steve looks at him with this quizzical look, and he goes, yeah, Bob, of course I'm coaching the defense on here. And he goes, well, would you coach them for crying out? He started out, he's a little annoyed, right? So Steve's like, okay, So a few possessions later in practice, he stops it again. And they had a player on the team named Nick Van Exel, who played in the NBA for 13 years. Nick was a junior college transfer that year from Kenosha, Wisconsin. And Huggs says to him, he says, Nick, he says, you know what? You come in my office every day and you tell me how much more playing time you deserve and that you're not getting enough shots and blah, blah, blah. And he goes on. He goes, and then I watch you in practice and you don't play hard and you don't do anything your coaches ask. He says, you know what? I'm so sick of your, he says, go back to Kenosha, Wisconsin. And Van Exel's looking at him like, yeah, right, I don't know. And I'm sitting there going, oh, this is gonna be interesting to see what happens here. And Van Exel sits there and Huggs starts getting more irate. He says, no, I'm serious. Take your and go drop it off and go back to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where you came from. You're not going to play for me ever again. And Van Exel throws his jersey down and he leaves the gym. And I'm sitting there going, oh. I mean, I think they were 13 or 14-1 at the time, right? And he's kicking off. I think he might have been his second or maybe even leading scorer at that moment. He's kicking him out of the gym in front of the top recruit in the country. And I'm going, wow, this is going to be interesting to see what happens. Well, the end of the story goes that eventually Van Exel kind of crept his way back in. He went over by his assistant coach, Larry Robinson, and he started whispering something. Larry just said, well, you stand right here for a few minutes, whatever. That weekend, I made sure to tune in. They were playing University of Alabama Alabama Birmingham that weekend, and Van Exel had his coming out party. He actually accepted the coaching, and he had a phenomenal game against UAB, and then that led them all the way to the Final Eight that year, that Cincinnati team. So the reason I love telling that story, I used to tell all the teams I coached that story because Van Exel had a choice to make. He was either going to accept coaching the way that Huggins wanted him to accept it, or he was going to leave. And I to this day, I believe Huggins was serious about that. Like, he had grown weary of listening to this kid run his mouth. It was time to show me, not tell me. And the rest is history. Van Exel went on to have a 13-year NBA career. I saw Bob do the same thing. I coached an All-American at Euclid High School when I came back up here. A guy named Mel Levitt, who subsequently played for Huggins. And I brought him up down to Cincinnati for his official visit. And Mel was having trouble with a teacher who was actually a friend of mine. I was his paper boy when I was a kid. And Mel just would not get along with this teacher. And Hugs calls him in the office. He says, Mel, when you go back to Euclid High School, you're going to kiss this teacher's patootie. And Mel's like, I'm not going to. And Hugs looks at him. He says, Mel, who's going to win if you kiss his patootie? He goes, well, I guess I would. He goes, exactly. So you're going to go back to Euclid and you're going to kiss this guy. Now, from that point on, I decided to help Mel. It was a social studies class. It was a psychology class. I helped him a little bit more. I helped him learn how to write a research paper. From that moment on, Mel accepted that he had to go back and be a better student, not just the athlete that he'd always been. And so Bob had this incredible way with his kids. And I can tell you, every other guy that ever played for him that I knew felt the same way about him. He could deliver the message. He could deliver the message you needed to have in the moments you needed to have them to make that change in your life. And I think that's what great coaches do. Any other questions?
Hey, Pat.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, tell everybody, Coach Mackey had a, fairly public fall, but I don't think people know how great of a story his life turned out to be. So would you finish on that?
I sure would. So Coach Mackey, of course, had an extreme fall from grace. He was in June of 1990. He was filmed on camera coming out of a Cleveland crack house on East 118th Street. We all knew that Coach liked to drink a little bit, but we had no idea how far he had slid in terms of his addiction. That was the end of his college coaching career. We didn't know it at that moment, but Cleveland State subsequently fired him. And he went down to the John Lucas Rehabilitation Center in Houston, cleaned himself up, and then for the next 10 to 15 years, he coached in all the alphabet leagues, the USBL. Ted Stepien even bought a team in Mansfield, a professional team, just so that he could hire Mackey to coach the team. Ted was also a recovering alcoholic and was very benevolent with Coach Mackey. And so Coach cleaned himself up, and then a few years later, he was coaching the Miami Tropics in the United States Basketball League down in Miami, and he got a phone call, and this is the way he described it to me. He said, I got a phone call, and the phone rings in my room, and he goes, hello, and hi, this is Larry Bird. Can I speak to Coach Mackey? And he goes, yeah, right, I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he hangs up the phone on him. And he hangs up the phone on him. So the phone rings again, and it's Larry Bird. Well, Larry, with all his Boston ties, had asked all the Boston guys like Rick Pitino and some of those guys who the greatest top talent scout they ever saw was. And they told him Kevin Mackey was by far the best scouting talent scout that they'd ever seen. So Bird hired him, and for the rest of his career, the next 15 years up until about 3 years ago, he was the chief talent scout for the Indiana Pacers. So a lot of those no-name guys that you probably still don't know their names, who still play really well for Indiana. Coach Mackey was instrumental in helping them build some of their better teams in the last 20 years. And he never went back out to drink or use again. He reconciled with his wife and lived his remaining few years back up in Boston with her and his family. Really, it's a redemption story to such a degree. Never did get the chance to coach again, but he certainly redeemed himself as a recovering alcoholic. And I know he was very proud of that and very proud of the success that his family had made and so on and so forth. So, Dave, how's that?
It's great.
Okay, if there's no other question, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity. This was a great opportunity. I wish you all the best. God bless.